Hello and welcome to Culture Vibes, the Federal's special program in which we talk to writers and artists about their work. Today, I'm joined by well-known writer Somnath Batabyal, who teaches at the School of Oriental and African Studies in London. His latest book is a heartbreakingly beautiful novel, Red River, which is about love and loyalty in violent times. Published by Context, it explores larger questions of identity, migration, nationalism, and separatism through the story of three families and their bond through the decades. Somnath, welcome to this episode of The Federal. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
So this is the book, and
the book.
Yeah. So my first question, Somnath, is about the novel which has been in the making for about 13 odd years, and but I also noticed that when you read it, you also sense the kind of urgency it has acquired in recent years. And I was wondering if you wrote this as your response to the ongoing discourse around identity and belonging, especially in the Northeast, and what sort of shaped its political core.
When I started thinking about the book, my publishers, my editors were like in 2010, oh, this is very urgent, right? And I finished it in 2023, end of 2023. It's still very urgent,
Absolutely.
right? So this time span hasn't changed the politics. There's no resolution. And this is not only to do with Assam or India, the politics of identity, the politics of nationalism, the politics of othering, the refugee crisis. This has been on for a long while now. It's not a recent phenomenon. So my attempt was to, of course, it's a love story. It's a story of young love and friendship and loyalty and betrayal. But it's more a meditation on the nation state itself, on how we owe our allegiance to a concept and how we live or die for it. There is no not liking your country. There is no ability to secede, unless, of course, you get a new passport. But, this belonging, this idea of belonging to 1.5 billion people as a group, none of them I know, right? I might know 100 odd people. So this was the idea which I wanted to think through. And a nation state is an old institution. It's been around for few hundred years now. So therefore, the urgency doesn't go away. There are moments of eruption. And I think in 2010, that moment was there. And in 23, it hasn't lessened. It has perhaps become more virulent.
Right. So even though it's a work of fiction, there's a great deal in the novel which is based on reality. I mean, it's reality, it's lived life. And I wanted to ask you if you were consciously, working on a sort of balance between, I mean, even though there were imaginary characters, but it's very much real.
It is real it's a work of fiction first, right? But yeah. It seems real perhaps because of the deep research, I'm an ethnographer, I'm an anthropologist by profession. So I've grown up in Assam, so there's a lived experiential moment there. But I went back during the research years. I lived in a small tea garden, not like a tea planter's garden, it's a tea grower, small grower, built a bamboo hut and lived in the village and interviewed every family in different ways. None of it really needs to be in the story, but they're there. I went back to my school, my headmasters, I traveled with them. So that aspect, that real deep interrogation of the times is there. Then there's a lot of reading. I cannot tell you the amount I read, not only on Assam, but on the idea of the nation state, the idea of belonging, the idea of community. And third, I wanted to be 100% assured that historical facts, and there's a lot of history in this book, in that sense that a lot of historical events, recent historical events happen, Operation Rhino,
yes.
Operation Pushback, Operation All Clear, 1971 Bangladesh, which dates and what happened in 1950, what happened during the Bengal famine, all has its ramifications, right? Now, you can't be wrong in those. So if there is a gathering at Mujibur Rahman's house on a particular day, that has to be that particular day. And you have to know what happened there, right? So those kind of things were embedded into that. My characters respond to historical moments. So they are fictional. And because of those historical moments, they're like, say, Operation Pushback. There's a major thing which happens because of Operation Pushback, right? So I just wanted to throw my character. That hasn't happened to me. That hasn't happened to anyone I know, right? But it has happened to people. So in that sense, of course, it's real. Operation Pushback has done that to people. Not to me, not to people I know personally,
right,
but in the accounts I've read, in the people I have met it has happened.
right.
And then you fictionalize it.
True. And it applies to the other characters in the novel as well, like the school headmaster.
Yes. So the school headmaster is an interesting story. I mean, I went back and met my headmaster, and who, for the release of the book, which was a very sweet, it was his 74th birthday, and he threw a big, massive book launch for me in Assam. So it was a kind of welcoming back the prodigal son whom no one liked. So, and, 900 people turned up, justices and advocates and lawyers and all my school friends. So that was an interesting moment. But the headmaster character is not my own headmaster per se, right? There are moments I've taken from him, but there are many things I've added to it. I have met other priests, other headmasters, other teachers, and thought about it a bit more, So again, no character in this book is actually a character. I've taken from things and then really run with it.
Right. So that, of course, would have entailed drawing on a lot of your own personal experiences and weaving those threads in the novel, which comes out really beautifully. The way you manage different timelines, different sort of characters and families, and how their sort of lives intertwine, with each other. And this realism that is in the novel, despite this, you were very conscious that you had to write a novel, is it?
Okay, this is interesting. I'm glad you asked this question because, when I first started working on the book in 2010, it was meant to be an ethnographic account of a village in India between two election cycles. That was my research brief from my publisher. Go at one election, stay, and next election, see what changes happen. But within 6 months, I realized as the stories started coming, that this was a bigger story, that the things people were telling me were so disparate. That is one. And I couldn't control it in the limits which nonfiction sets, which is like you have to be correct at it. Because there were other truths, there were bigger truths than this is what happened in 1981, right? But because of 1981, something else might have happened. So that might have pushed me out. And then, in my own life, things changed. My father passed. That brought a host of memories. He came from Dhaka in 1942 as a 6-year-old holding his mother's hand, and with a 4-year-old brother and his mother pregnant, and they walked to Dhaka. So imagine the trauma. And then my son was born almost at the same time. So this comings and goings started to the bigger question of belonging. And I live in England at the moment. I have a British passport. What will I pass on to my son? Those stories. So just facts couldn't do that. So while it is really real, I wanted to tell all these stories, but it is also a joyful story, of school times before we had television.
Yeah.
You have to go and see the first show of an Amitabh Bachchan star. What will you do for it, right? Your cricket matches and, being excluded, the fun of going to a circus. So there's a lot of joy. I wanted to also rethink, and this was a very political moment which came later as Gaza and Ukraine and all of this really came to the fore, that in times of violence, how do people live? How do children live? How do they adjust? There's still love. There's still joy. There's still friendship. There's still holding of hands. And I wanted to, really bring those moments out.
No, it does. It does actually is shot through with that kind of understanding and empathy, and that of course that lived reality is always there. One question about this need for some characters to run away from memory, to run away, from certain parts of the past maybe, but at the same time stay connected to it. Did you sort of consciously work on it?
So how do you deal with the trauma that this one character has gone through, or two of them, or three of them, right? How do you deal with it? I mean, it's so brutal. It's so massive that to live, you want to shut it down. You don't want to talk about it, right? I'll give you examples, like in partition times. Partition is an unhealed wound because no one spoke about it. People went silent. The stories were stopped. Bangladesh, similar, right? We couldn't speak about that trauma. It was just overwhelming. It will overwhelm your today. And you had to survive till tomorrow. These are survival mechanisms, right? But the past doesn't go away. The trauma comes out in different ways. And you have to find ways to reconcile. There's no full reconciliation. Re-understanding, rethinking, finding ways to be alive, in this really brutal world which we live in, violent, tempestuous. You never know, right? Somebody who comes, imagine a child coming on those rough seas to a new country. That trauma, how do you live with that? Probably father dying on the road and the mother dying and coming alone and then finding no one to welcome. How? So all these questions were part of it. This absolute, we see people who are walking around us normally, they carry such stories in them. So that was for me a big moment. Not big moment, I wanted to, I didn't plan this story. As I was writing it, it just started to happen. And it happened and it flew. And then I didn't know how this character can handle this trauma. So he had to shut up because there was no way he could connect to it. He and his mother never speaks about it. So I hope that answers something,
Absolutely. So do you see yourself or shades of yourself in Samar's character in the way that, you have sort of created him in the novel?
It's a question I'm asked all the time. Look, it is true that Samar's character, I jump off my experiential for Samar's. I'm a Bengali. I was alive in Assam, Guwahati at that point of time in the 80s and 90s. And I went to a school similar to St. Joseph's. That is, yeah. But what happens to Samar has never happened to me.
Right.
Nothing
of fiction writer, you sort of obviously dramatize.
Then, so my most difficult thing here has been to kill myself in the book. I have killed myself. Samar's profession is never my profession. I have deeply researched that profession in London and in Assam, right? Deeply researched. So I had to kill Samar. My first draft, you wouldn't believe it, no, was 260,000 words. Today it's 100,000 words. So 160,000 words have been thrown away. So the most difficult thing was to make sure, you see, when you write about yourself too much, the story is not interesting, right? My life is not that interesting, right? My life has been lived by a million others. So you have to let go of yourself, and do something else.
Right. One wonders what what have been left behind while
Oh gosh. There is another 160,000 words. There are two novels left behind. I dare not look at it,
Right, right. Also, this bit about the structuring, Somnath. You begin, of course, with the cricket match, and it's a very tender moment in the sense that a TV has arrived in the house, and there is a lot of expectation building up of the expectation of watching the match, World Cup cricket match, and then towards the end of the very first chapter, we are introduced with this jarring reality, the backdrop of Assam, where the Ulfa is sort of starting its activities, I think, around then, right? So, and then, of course, as we dive deep into the novel, we discover many heartbreaking moments, of course. But this part about telling Summer's story in his voice, that is also a part of the structure. If you could talk a little bit about the structure of the novel and how we sort of settled on it.
It's a very good question. Thank you for that. So the first three stories, which is our parents' stories, right? I'm an academic writing fiction, right? I had to imagine it theoretically. I wanted to question and understand the nation state, right? This is my true fiction without ever, I hope no one can really understand it by reading the book, but so I wanted to imagine it from the point of the refugee who wants to belong. So the refugee characters there in that first chapter, it's called The Refugee, wants to belong. The second chapter is the believer, the army man's story. He believes in the nation state. He fights for the nation state. And the third one is the rebel, the one who doesn't want to belong to the nation state, right? So this, in a sense, these are my three theoretical positions I set up to interrogate this larger meta idea of how borders are created, how borders change, who decides who is today welcome, tomorrow not welcome. So once this is done, and the next part, our stories, that's where the fun starts, right? Here are these three boys of these three families together suddenly, and the joy of an Assamese boy and a Bengali boy whose communities are fighting each other like mad are best friends.
Yeah.
Right? Ready to die for each other. And then in comes the army man's son, who also becomes, tremendously the overpowering, beautiful figure.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, but they're all at odds with each other if you think of the nation state. The refugee is not to belong. There's the army man to push out. The separatist definitely doesn't want to stay, and the army man is supposed to keep them together. So this contradiction, but the friendships were real. This actually is true, right? Not the necessarily same stories. If you ask me how much is real, those moments, of our stories, of this childhood moments, much of it is true. And much of it I had to take away because it was too much. It's so, in a sense, the seriousness of the book would be taken away by the frivolity of childhood. So my editors culled a lot. But so that is very true. And then when book 2 starts with Summer's story, right? And as we move on, so the story's then taken over by him because the other two gets left behind. He's pushed out, right? And he moves away. And I couldn't find a third person voice to tell that story. So it had to come out of him. And what I did is I sat back and I let Summer, because that has never happened to me. That is a new Summer, right? This is not me. So I let Summer talk to me. Where would you go? And of course, history has affected him. The Bangladesh movement, the political connections are all from the past. So what would happen? And how would he move? And what would he do? And finally, I had to bring him back because he has to find his own answers. No one can find them for him. And there were the answers.
Absolutely. And Somnath, also the fact that, it's also a novel which is rooted in a place. And in this particular case, it happens to be, I mean, even though the novel, uh, also, there are bits in Dhaka and Bhutan and London. Uh, most of the action takes place in Guwahati, Assam. And it's a state where you write at some point in the novel that where poetry and pain are inseparable. And
Yes.
I was just curious
Oh, very kind of you to mention that. Yes,
yeah,
yes.
yeah, and I was just curious to know that, in your do you also see it as a novel about a place, about this river that sort of informs and enriches the life around it, the river Brahmaputra, and you write also somewhere that the river carries all our stories towards the end somewhere, and uh, and what I think Lucky tells her son, that's Sama, that carry the river on your heart and you will never walk alone. That's again towards the end of the novel. So my question is do you also sort of set out to make it as a novel of a particular place, and in this case, of course, Assam?
I wish every reader was you. I'm absolutely bowled over. I'm really, really, you know, um, this is very heartfelt, no, that the kindness with which you read and the deepness is very telling. Thank you first for that.
Thanks for writing the novel, really.
Thank you, thank you. Now, see, I wanted to be very exacting when describing places, right? And areas. I've been all the places I write about, I have been there personally, right? If it's Bhutan, I've gone through those routes.
Yes.
If it's Bangladesh, I've been there, right? All the houses I talk about are there, right? So Gopalpur House, which you read, is there. So their names are changed, slight topography. So yes, did I want to write about Guwahati? Yes, I wanted to absolutely be able to situate it in a small town at a particular point of time, being torn apart by violence. And I think the rootedness, the more rooted a novel is, the more universal a story is.
Absolutely. Couldn't
So
agree.
I had to absolutely, every lane is known to me.
Mm.
Milonpur, I can close my eyes and I know what is where, right? So that rootedness was very necessary for me to um, write this. The way I write is imagine, see people moving, see people coming, going. I have it's like a film going in my head, and I write it out, and then like an editor, I cut. But it's a story which is happening to me.
Right. And this bit about rebirth, and there's a beautiful line that I think Geeta tells Lucky early on in the novel that you also bring somewhere towards the end, that rebirth is nothing but tradition, and it's stories that we tell, in fact. That that is the idea that also
Yeah, they're going to make me well up because it's I don't know. Oh my goodness me. This is just beautiful. Thank you.
yeah.
So this is a tragic story almost. Not a tragic story. When I think about it now, it makes me sad because my father, I asked my father, Baba, what is rebirth? He was at least in his younger years, he was an atheist. He was a communist,
Mm.
like all good Bengalis were, right? What is rebirth? And he told me that rebirth is nothing but tradition, because what I tell you, you will carry, and you'll tell your son, and your son will carry. And every time, so I know if I look at the mirror, I see my father's face.
Mm.
I teach his values to my son, and hopefully my son will carry on. And in this way, people continue, right? Not necessarily, some famous people will continue in names. And people, there's a saying that a person dies when their name is spoken for the last time. I don't agree, because ideas, mannerisms, thoughts carry on in different ways, 10 generations later, something of my father will move on. So that is rebirth. And that is what I wanted to convey in that.
It comes across really, really beautifully and very, very, in a very, very touching way. I mean, you were sort of really moved by, because there's also a connect then that you sort of discover. No, it is, as I said, it is a heartbreakingly beautiful novel, which moves you, which also pains you, also delights you in places. So thank you for writing this. And one last question, Somnath, about, the discourse around, and especially after this, Citizenship Amendment Act, CAA, and now that there is a talk around and fears around it that has sort of magnified after, the implementation now. And I was just curious to know what you make of this. I mean, you live in London, but your own understanding of how is it playing out in Assam?
It's a difficult question. So this not, and I'll tell you, not for I want to avoid it, but this novel doesn't reach up to the time of the Citizenship Amendment Act. It finishes earlier. Yeah. So I literally avoided reading about CAA so that my book doesn't get influenced, because I will react to that moment, right? So I had to stop. I wouldn't want to read newspapers. I had a general idea, but I wouldn't want to pontificate on it. Right? That is one. And second is, immediately after the book has been released and I was traveling around, I have got together books, journal papers, interviews. I've collected them together. And I'm going to start reading on it now. So as a scholar, I don't want to respond to that particular moment because I don't know enough about it, right? Again, as I said, I know the general thing anyone will tell you. There's no point me telling you. But there is a larger question which I'll try and answer, which is, it's what the novel tries to understand, that who gives the right about belonging and who tells you that you can't belong, you don't belong. This politics. So yes, today somebody belongs in a particular place, let's say, and is safe. Next day, for some quirk of fate, they travel abroad. I want them to imagine that if the same thing says you don't belong, what happens then? How will you react when the politics is of other identity politics like this? Now, identity politics can be of many ways, but this kind of communal identity politics will always other somebody, and that could be you. I want that empathy to be there, right? In Calcutta, I belong, right? I'm a Bengali in Calcutta. Fine, I stride there. In Delhi, I belong, it's my home city. In London, I don't in that same way. But London is a place which, very different from the rest of England, makes you belong. They create ways of belonging, right? You don't feel othered. I mean, you feel othered. But the general thing is that no, right? Of course, there's a refugee, migrant conversation, politics, backward. So while I can't answer that particular thing because I haven't read enough, exclusionary politics I find very difficult and to digest, and I feel ashamed.
Yeah, maybe there is another novel that will perhaps delve deeper into this question about,
there is one, but not set in Assam.
Yeah. Okay. So hopefully, that will happen soon, and we'll look forward to talking to you about that as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Somnath. It was really lovely talking to you.
This was the best interview I have had until now. This has been superb. I have really enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you so much. Really touched.
Subscribe to the Federal's YouTube page for more news and updates.